I think it's pretty solid advice.
Groups of cells in different parts of your brain, they're all connected.
The statistics just don't back it up. There's nothing here.
Any complex life you find has mitochondria.
We have discovered things from athletes juicing.
My name is Matt Kaberlein, and welcome to the Optispan Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan Podcast. On today's episode, what I want to do is kind of take a step back and focus a bit more on the things that really matter, the things that move the needle. The reason why I started doing this podcast, the reason why I started Optispan, is really with the goal to help as many people as possible get closer to their own optimal health span trajectory. So we spent a lot of time on the podcast, talking about the biology of aging, doing a deep dive into the mechanisms of longevity. And we're going to keep doing that because it's something that I really enjoy, I'm passionate about, and I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly not the only piece. And what I want to start doing is spending a bit more time on the bigger picture stuff and what we're actually doing at Optispan on a day-to-day basis to hopefully at least give you ideas for how you can start to incorporate some of these things into your own lives. And I also want to start to push back a little bit on something that I've been very frustrated with in the health and wellness space, which is just how much time gets wasted on stuff that just doesn't matter. Or if it does, it's incremental. We don't spend enough time talking about the things that actually move the needle. And instead, there's a lot of back and forth over just nonsense. Like, should you wait an hour and a half to have your first cup of coffee? I mean, come on. Really? Is that important to talk about and really spend a lot of bandwidth on? I don't think so. I think supplements largely fall into this category of things that are incremental at best. And people spend a lot of time focusing on it, but really doesn't move the needle. There are other things that we know do move the needle. So I want to start to spend a little bit more time talking about the things that move the needle. And so today, I'm just going to take a very high level approach, but I think it's important. So I hope you will stick with me and actually try to implement some of what we talk about today in your own life. So I'm going to go back to kind of the foundation of the way we think about health at Optispan, or at least the way we start when we're evaluating where each individual is at on their own health journey. And we start with what we call the pillars of Healthspan, and everybody's got their pillars of health. We like 4. We like action words, verbs. So we go with eat, move, sleep, connect. And I've introduced these before on the podcast, but what I want to do today is really, again, just tackle this from a pretty high level perspective. So eat, of course, is referring to nutrition. Move is referring to exercise and activity. Sleep, of course, is referring to sleep quality. And connect encapsulates both our personal connection to the world around us. So that would also include mindfulness. And it also captures our human connection, right? Our relationships with other people. Now, is this everything? No, of course not. But I think, foundationally, these are the 4 most important things to think about and to start to identify, where are there opportunities for improvement? And maybe most importantly, where's the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that you can do as an individual to have the biggest effect on your health going forward? Okay, so that's really where we start. We try to think about each person who's part of the Optispan community and evaluate where are they at in each of these 4 pillars of Healthspan. And just a couple things to say about the pillars. First, I don't know if they're equally important for individuals. They're not, right? Again, some people are going to be weakest in eat. Some people are going to be weakest in move, sleep, connect, same thing. But they're all super important on whole and also interconnected, of course, right? What you eat, how much you eat is going to be impacted by how much you exercise. Of course, how much you exercise can influence your quality of sleep. Your quality of sleep can influence everything else about your life. And of course, if you're super stressed out or if you have very challenging relationships or a lack of human relationships, that can have effects on all of the other pillars as well. So these things are interconnected, but we attempt to prioritize them individually because we need some way to create a framework. The other thing I want to say about the pillars is, there's a reason why each of these impacts pretty much every major disease, every major functional decline and disability. And that's because each of these pillars directly impacts the biology of aging. So, I had somebody recently tell me that, they were quite frustrated because they went to their primary care physician and asked about, what can be done to impact the biology of aging. They'd certainly heard a lot about the longevity field. And their doctor told them, well, there's nothing you can do to impact aging. Aging is just the natural progression, passage of time. And so if you have that experience, or if you have anybody who ever says that to you, you might just ask them, hey, doc, why is it that eating a healthy diet or exercising regularly or getting good sleep impacts my risk of cancer, my risk of heart disease, my risk of diabetes, my risk of dementia, and pretty much every other age-related disease? Why is that, doc? And the answer is because those things impact the biology of aging. They affect the rate at which you are aging biologically. That's why they impact all of the functional declines and diseases of aging. So if we think about those hallmarks of aging, underlying the hallmarks of aging are the pillars of Healthspan because they impact that network of interactions that regulates the rate of biological aging. And I think that should be pretty clear, but if not, maybe the thought experiment that I just laid out can be helpful in having that conversation. So again, as I mentioned, one of the first things we do at Optispan is try to evaluate where each individual is at with respect to each of the pillars of Healthspan. And for most people, it pretty quickly becomes apparent which pillar is the weak link. Sometimes it's more than one, but often it turns out to be, one of these pillars of Healthspan that is the weak link for that person. And that's where we focus our effort first. And so we try to assess the pillars of Healthspan in a variety of ways. So we use many different diagnostics, and in an upcoming episode, I'll really kind of take you through what those diagnostics are, actually what a gateway experience looks like at Optispan. So you can get a feel for, maybe what you might want to incorporate into your own health journey going forward. But it's a combination of blood work, so pretty comprehensive blood work that looks at the systems of health, body composition. So we've talked about DEXA before on the podcast. Assessments of physical capacity, so VO2 max, strength, flexibility, mobility. Wearables are actually quite useful at querying some of the pillars of Healthspan. So things like continuous glucose monitoring for eat, sleep trackers for sleep, fitness trackers for move. And then self-assessments, I think, are really, in many ways, the gold standard. And that's what I want to talk about more today, is just a really easy way that each of us, through self-assessment, can try to identify which pillar is our weak link. And then we also utilize what we call Healthspan coaches. And again, I'll talk more about that in future episodes of the podcast, to help people evaluate and help us evaluate where individuals are at in each of these pillars of Healthspan, and also provide ongoing support, encouragement, and evaluation as people make progress in their Healthspan journey. So the coaching, I think, can be quite valuable for helping people both identify where they're at and move to a better Healthspan trajectory. I think the question I would pose to each of you watching right now is to just take a minute and try to identify which pillar is your weakest link. And again, maybe it's more than one, but I think for most people, we can pretty easily identify where we're struggling the most in terms of these 4 pillars of Healthspan. And then, at some point today, identify one thing you can do to improve that pillar. Just make a start, right? I know it can feel overwhelming, like there's so many things I need to do, especially if you get lost in the weeds and the nonsense of some of these influencers out there. There's so many things I need to do. Like, let's just, again, focus on the stuff that matters. And this matters, okay? So identify which pillar you are weakest in. And then once you've done that, think about one thing you can do to improve that pillar. And then maybe spend the next couple of weeks or the next month focused on that one thing. And again, it's just useful to appreciate how important habits are. If you can change a habit, you can make a productive change in your health that actually moves the needle, okay? And you can change habits sequentially. So let's pick one thing, let's get that taken care of, and then we'll move on to the next one. So in a month, reevaluate, maybe focus on a new pillar, maybe it's going to still be the same pillar, and repeat. And if you're not sure where to start, that's okay. Just start the process, and we can give you some ideas. So I think for me, there's no question about it in my mind, my weakest pillar is connect. And I've already started taking steps to strengthen that pillar. And again, it's not something that changes overnight. It's a matter of creating new behaviors, new habits. And then once it becomes a habit, it becomes easier to stick with. Okay. So just throwing out some ideas. Again, everybody's going to be different, but let's say your weakest pillar is sleep. Okay. You can consider what are some factors that may be contributing to that. Is it stress from work? Is it stress from relationships? If it's stress from relationships or lack of relationships, maybe it's connect you need to start with, not sleep. Okay. Maybe it's medications. Are you taking medications? Are you taking medications that could interfere with your sleep? Are you taking medications for sleep? And then what can you do about it? And again, we've heard a lot about sleep hygiene. Again, I think it's pretty easy to get lost in the weeds here, but there are some things that clearly can have an impact on sleep quality, and it's worth trying, like going to sleep at the same time each night. It's not rocket science. Maybe try stopping all screen time at least an hour before bed. Maybe reduce caffeine. I brought up coffee. I don't think it matters whether you drink coffee first thing in the morning or you wait an hour and a half for most people. In fact, I'm quite confident it doesn't matter for most people. But if you are sensitive to caffeine, maybe you don't want to drink coffee or anything caffeinated after noon or after 5 p.m. Okay, so those are the kinds of things you can think about and then change your habits. Maybe you don't want to eat snacks after dinner. Maybe cut out the alcohol. I don't know how many of you have worn an Oura Ring. One thing the Oura Ring is very good at telling you is the negative impact for the vast majority of people that alcohol has on sleep quality. Again, try it. See if things improve. Okay, what if your weakest pillar is eat? So there's a bunch of stuff here that you can try. And it depends on what your habits already are, obviously. I think some low-hanging fruit for a lot of people, stop. We'll go back to coffee. Okay, I'm fixated on coffee, right? You guys can tell. Stop adding sugar to your coffee. Like, don't drink your calories is, I think, a good habit for many people to get into. Stop adding sweeteners to your coffee or drinking sugary drinks. Maybe you need to focus on getting more protein. Maybe, I think a really good strategy is shop around the edges of the grocery store. If you find yourself going down the middle aisles a lot, that's probably not the kind of food you want to be buying and bringing into your house and eating. Related, reduce the ultra-processed foods. And again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe start with one day a week. Just if you're eating ultra-processed crap every day, just make a commitment. You know what? Wednesdays, I'm not going to eat anything ultra-processed, right? Doesn't have to be going from 0 to 100 miles per hour right away. We can go back to alcohol, cut out the alcohol. That applies to the eat pillar as well. I think for a lot of people, and this is something that I found valuable in the past, I think using a food tracker actually can be quite valuable. So I've personally used MyFitnessPal. I know there are others out there, but it's valuable for a couple of reasons. Because number one, it actually makes you think about what you're eating. And it also teaches you like what a portion is, right? What does 500 calories look like of this particular kind of food or that kind of food? Where are the hidden calories? So I really think you don't have to do it for the rest of your life, but I really think using a food tracker for a few months and then maybe coming back once a year for a couple of months or a few weeks, there's a lot of value in that. And it's an educational process and you're not going to unlearn what you learn. So it's one of these things where you can't unsee it once you've seen it. And I think there's quite a bit of value there. Okay. What if move is your weak pillar? So again, I think Trackers can be really good just to know where you're at. Also for goal setting. Again, there's nothing magic about 10,000 steps or 7,000 steps or whatever your goal is, but it's useful to have goals. I think a big one for many, many people is to make a dedicated effort to incorporate some form of resistance training at least twice a week. And it can be body weight, it can be free weights, it can be machines. There's all sorts of options here. But getting in the habit of doing resistance training and finding a form of resistance training that you enjoy or at least can stick with for the long run, I think is really important for building and maintaining muscle mass. And we've talked about all the reasons why muscle mass is important, and we'll talk about it more in the future. But for now, just trust me, it's super important to have sufficient amount of muscle mass as you're getting older, both for functional health and for metabolic health. And metabolic health affects every aspect of biological aging and health overall. So really, really important to figure out how you can incorporate into your move pillar strategies that will help you build and maintain muscle mass going forward. Maybe it's as simple as, depending on where you're at, standing up and walking around for at least a few minutes every hour of the day. Again, at this point, it's more about just making a start, picking one thing and turning it into a habit. Maybe it's setting a new training goal. Maybe you have a goal for VO2 max, as an example, or how much you can bench press, whatever. Again, for me, I think one of the things that has been really valuable over the last several years is during my resistance training, really focusing on, I guess what I would say is form, how I'm doing the exercises versus how much I'm doing. So I think like a lot of guys, I tended to think about how much weight can I move as opposed to, am I doing this in a safe way that really focuses on doing the movement properly. And I've completely changed that around. And it really has had a huge impact on not just, how much I can lift, but my risk of hurting myself while I'm lifting weights. So I think that's another thing that you can do. There's all sorts of options here. And then finally, for the connect pillar, this one I think is a challenging one for a lot of people, especially I think a lot of men, middle-aged men. I know that's a generalization, but I think there's a reason why some of these generalizations are widely held, because there's some truth there. So I think it depends on where your challenges with Connect are. I think for some people, meditation, breath work as a way to both become more grounded and potentially reduce stress can be quite valuable. I think for others, and I would put myself in this boat, reconnecting with friends and family. I personally think in person, if possible, versus virtual. Another idea would be, if you feel like you don't have a lot of social connections, take up a new social activity. Maybe even combine it with the move pillar. Maybe something like softball or, hiking club, or maybe it's something else that you enjoy. Maybe it's a group writing club or a painting club, or, there's all sorts of social activities that you can get involved with to just get out there and interact with people. Again, these are just ideas, but hopefully it gives you, at least a place to start. So again, your homework is to identify which pillar you are weakest in, write it down, and then identify at least one thing you can do to improve that pillar. And then spend, the next couple of weeks, maybe a month, focused on that one thing, and let us know how it goes. We're really interested in hearing your success stories. And, I think, again, going back to what I talked about before, focusing on the things that can actually move the needle. If you do this exercise, I guarantee you it will move the needle. Especially if you do it iteratively and repeat. We can spend a lot of time talking about nonsense, or we can spend some time actually doing the stuff that's going to have an impact. And this is the stuff that's going to have an impact. So I hope you'll actually take it seriously. I hope you give it a try. If you want to try an advanced exercise Every day, you can write down the 4 pillars: eat, move, sleep, connect before you go to bed, and make a little note about how things went in each of those pillars. And that'll get your brain thinking. You go to bed thinking about these things, and you'll come up with, new insights and new ideas on how you can actually take active steps to improve your own health span trajectory. So thanks for listening. I hope that this has been useful. As always, please feel free to post any comments or questions. I hope some of you will post success stories. If you're not yet a subscriber, hit the subscribe button, and we'll have more strategies to enhance health span on upcoming episodes of the Optispan podcast.